New Year's Eve, a night filled with hope, laughter, and celebration. But for some, it's a night that brings darkness, fear, and unexplainable events that will haunt them forever. Tonight, I'll share 3 true stories that will make you question what really happens when the clock strikes midnight. Turn off the lights, settle in, and get ready for the Eerie Hour. Rachel had hoped for a quiet New Year's Eve. What she got instead was a nightmare she'd never forget. Rachel, a 22-year-old college student, had always enjoyed solitude. New Year's Eve in particular was a time she cherished for the peace it brought. No crowds, no parties, just her and the quiet of her home. This year, her family had gone on a ski trip, leaving Rachel alone in their quiet suburban house. She relished the opportunity to enjoy her favorite evening without any distractions. A night of watching movies, perhaps reading a book by the fireplace and reflecting on the year gone by. It was exactly what she had envisioned. After a solitary, uneventful dinner, Rachel stepped into the backyard to get some fresh air and enjoy the fireworks lighting up the horizon. The evening sky was crisp and clear, with a light breeze carrying the sounds of distant celebrations. The backyard backed up to a thick patch of woods, while the front yard and street were visible through a fence. It was peaceful, yet the quietness felt almost too heavy, like something was lurking just beyond her vision. That's when she noticed him. A man stood motionless under the streetlight across the street. Dressed in dark clothing, his figure seemed almost indistinct against the blackness of the night. But Rachel could make out the outline of a beanie pulled low over his head, concealing his face. For a moment, Rachel thought she might be imagining things, but the unease that crept into her gut told her otherwise. She stared at him for a few moments, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The man didn't move. Not a twitch, not a shift. He stood there, as if frozen in time. Rachel felt a chill run down her spine, but she convinced herself that he was simply a neighbor out for a late-night walk. The street wasn't exactly bustling, but it was not unusual for people to be out during New Year's Eve, especially when fireworks were in the air. Maybe he was waiting for someone, or maybe he was just lost in thought. Rachel waved at him, a tentative greeting, hoping to break the tension. But the man didn't wave back. He didn't move at all. Her stomach churned. Something about his stillness felt unnatural, like he didn't belong in this peaceful suburban setting. Her unease turned to a gnawing feeling of dread, but Rachel shrugged it off and went back inside, locking the door behind her. She tried to distract herself with her phone, scrolling aimlessly through social media. But she couldn't get the image of the man out of her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him standing there, unmoving, watching. A few hours later, she couldn't stand it anymore. The dread had built up in her stomach, a cold, heavy feeling that refused to leave. It was late, past midnight, and the street outside was quiet again, the fireworks now just distant memories. Rachel decided to peek through the curtains. Her breath caught in her throat. The man was still there, but now he was standing much closer at the edge of her driveway. He was no longer under the streetlight, but standing in the shadows just beyond the light's reach. His figure was barely discernible, but Rachel could feel his eyes on her even from a distance. Panic washed over her. Her heart pounded in her chest as she grabbed her phone. Her hand shook as she dialed 911, but she hesitated. What if he was just a harmless neighbor? What if he was simply waiting for someone, or had lost track of time? What if she was overreacting? But her gut told her something was wrong. She stared at the man through the curtains, and her breath quickened when he didn't move. Suddenly, a faint tapping sound interrupted her thoughts. Tap, tap, tap. Rachel's heart leapt in her chest as she froze, straining to listen. The sound came from the front door, as if someone was gently knocking, slow and deliberate. Her mind raced. She whispered, "Who's there?" No answer. Her breath hitched in her throat, and her grip tightened around the phone. Trembling, she dialed 911 and spoke in hushed tones. The operator was calm, reassuring her that officers were on their way, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was running out of time. As she waited for the police, the tapping ceased. The house fell silent. But then, another sound reached her ears. Footsteps. Footsteps. Coming from the backyard. Rachel's stomach churned. Her blood ran cold as she rushed to the back door, gripping a kitchen knife for protection. She peered through the blinds, her heart hammering in her chest. There, standing just outside the fence, was the man. He was staring directly at her house, his dark figure barely visible in the shadows. He was so still, like he was waiting for something. Rachel could feel his eyes piercing through the walls, even though she couldn't see his face. Her pulse raced. The urge to run, to escape, gripped her, but she knew she had to stay. The police were on their way, but every moment that passed felt like an eternity. Rachel backed away from the window and took a few deep breaths, trying to calm herself. She moved to the living room, but her mind was racing. Every shadow felt like it was him. Every creak of the house seemed louder than it should be. The minutes seemed to drag on. Just when she thought the worst was over, she heard the unmistakable sound of sirens in the distance. Relief washed over her as she ran to the door to meet the officers. When the police arrived, they quickly swept the property. They found no trace of the man, but they did find something strange. Footprints circling her home, but leading nowhere. There were no signs of him entering the yard or leaving through the street. It was as if the man had vanished into thin air. The officers told Rachel to stay inside and lock the doors, assuring her that they would conduct a search of the surrounding area. But Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. Even after they left, she felt his presence lingering, like he was watching her from somewhere just beyond her sight. Weeks passed, and although Rachel tried to move on, she couldn't forget the feeling of being watched. Every time she stepped outside, she looked over her shoulder, half expecting to see the dark figure of the man from that night. But he never returned. The strange events of that New Year's Eve would remain a mystery. Rachel couldn't explain what had happened, but she knew one thing for sure. She'd never look at her quiet suburban home the same way again. And as the months passed, she realized the terrifying truth. Sometimes, the scariest things aren't the ones we see, but the ones that remain unseen, watching from the shadows.
Sometimes the calmest of nights can bring the most terrifying of experiences. But what if a night meant for celebration turns into a mystery that never gets solved? That's what happened to a group of friends who thought they were in for the party of a lifetime. For Matt and his friends, New Year's Eve was supposed to be the party of the year, but not everyone made it home. Matt and his 5 closest friends, Sarah, Alex, Chris, Lila, and Emma, had spent months planning their New Year's Eve celebration. They were all looking forward to ringing in the new year in style, far away from the hustle and bustle of city life. After researching numerous vacation rentals, they found the perfect spot. A rustic, remote cabin nestled deep in the woods, hours away from the nearest town. It was the ideal getaway, surrounded by snow-covered trees, and it promised privacy, relaxation, and adventure. The group arrived at the cabin just after dusk, the last remnants of the day's sunlight slipping away as they unloaded their gear. They couldn't help but marvel at the tranquility of their surroundings. Silent, untouched snow stretched for miles. The cabin itself was cozy, with large windows that overlooked the frozen landscape. They quickly settled in, eager to start their weekend of fun. The evening was filled with laughter and excitement. The friends set up a makeshift bar in the living room, complete with food, drinks, and a few fireworks for later. They spent the early hours playing board games, sharing stories, and enjoying each other's company. The warmth of the fire crackled in the background, and outside, the first snowfall of the year began to fall, adding to the magic of the night. As midnight approached, they all gathered outside to watch the fireworks and welcome in the new year. The night sky erupted in brilliant colors, the sound of each explosion echoing through the quiet woods. It was a perfect moment, until Sarah noticed something odd. A figure, barely visible in the shadows of the trees at the edge of the clearing, stood motionless, watching them. "Hey, is that someone?" Sarah asked, squinting into the darkness. The group paused, unsure of what to make of it. The figure was dressed in dark clothing and stood under the cover of the trees, almost blending into the background. "Probably just another camper," Alex said, brushing it off. "We're not the only ones out here, right?" But the figure didn't move, and as the minutes passed, their unease grew. It wasn't just the stillness, it was the way the person didn't seem to acknowledge the fireworks, or even move a muscle. "Maybe it's a trick of the light," Alex suggested, but his voice didn't sound as convincing as he hoped. Still, Matt and Chris weren't satisfied. The unease was palpable, and they exchanged a look that said it all. They needed to investigate. "We'll go check it out," Matt said, trying to sound casual. "Are you sure?" Emma asked. "It's kind of creepy out there." But Matt and Chris, armed with flashlights, ventured into the woods, the soft crunch of snow beneath their boots the only sound breaking the eerie silence. The rest of the group stayed behind, their eyes fixed on the figures of Matt and Chris as their flashlights bobbed between the trees. They tried to laugh it off, but the air had turned cold with something else, an unspoken fear. Minutes passed, but Matt and Chris didn't return. Then, without warning, the shrill, blood-curdling scream of Matt echoed through the woods. It was a scream of pure terror. Both men came charging back into the clearing, their faces ashen, eyes wide with fear. "We need to leave!" Matt shouted, breathless. "Get in the car! Now!" In a state of panic, the group scrambled to pack their things, but when they turned to leave, someone caught their eye. The figure from the woods was no longer far away. It was standing at the edge of the clearing, much closer than before. Its face was obscured by a mask, a pale, featureless face that sent a chill down their spines. Without another word, the group piled into the car. The engine roared to life, and they sped down the narrow, snow-covered road. But as they glanced around, they realized something was horribly wrong. "Where's Lila?" Chris asked, his voice trembling. The realization hit them like a punch to the gut. Lila was missing. In their panic, they rushed back to the cabin, calling her name, desperately searching every room. But there was no sign of her. The police were contacted and they arrived the next morning, but despite combing the area for hours, they found no trace of Lila. No footprints leading away from the cabin, no signs of struggle. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. To this day, Lila's disappearance remains a mystery. Some say she was taken by the masked figure in the woods. Others believe she simply vanished, like the figure itself, never to be seen again. But Matt and his friends know one thing for certain. Their New Year's Eve celebration turned into a nightmare, and Lila's disappearance is forever etched into their minds. Not every story has a resolution, and sometimes, the questions linger longer than the answers. But what happens when the fear becomes personal, when the safety of your own home is threatened? Let's step into the chilling account of Jessica, whose New Year's took an unexpected turn. Jessica's New Year's resolution was to face her fears. She never expected to meet them head-on. Jessica had spent the past few months trying to rebuild her life after a messy breakup. Moving into her first apartment in the city was supposed to be a fresh start, a way to leave the past behind and embrace independence. She chose a small, cozy place on the 4th floor of an old building, which, although a little worn down, had a charm to it. The balcony, overlooking the city's skyline, had a perfect view of the fireworks that lit up the sky every New Year's Eve. This year, she had no interest in going out and partying. She wanted peace and quiet, so she made a resolution to spend the night alone, focused on herself. She had no idea that the solitude she craved would soon become a nightmare. The evening began like any other. She cooked herself a light dinner and set up a few candles around the apartment to create a relaxing ambiance. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, Jessica decided to step out onto the balcony to watch the city's fireworks show. She stood there for a while, enjoying the colorful display, feeling a sense of calm that had been missing from her life for months. For the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. Her phone buzzed, breaking her moment of tranquility. It was a text from an unknown number. "Nice view." At first, Jessica thought it was just a random message from a wrong number, so she shrugged it off. But then another text arrived, and this one sent a chill down her spine. "Don't close the curtains. I like watching you." A wave of dread washed over her. Her stomach twisted, and her heart began to race. She quickly went inside and locked the door, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. She didn't know who could be sending these messages, but the situation felt wrong, uncomfortable. She called the police, but the operator reassured her that it was probably just a prank. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She tried to calm down, telling herself it was nothing. But as she lay in bed trying to sleep, she heard a noise, a faint creak, followed by a soft tap against the glass. Her blood ran cold. Grabbing her phone, Jessica turned on the flashlight and shined it toward the balcony window. She froze in terror. A man stood there outside on the balcony, his face pressed against the glass. His eyes were wide, unblinking, staring straight at her. The shock of the moment paralyzed her. She couldn't move. Her breath caught in her throat. The man didn't make a sound. He simply stared, his presence suffocating. Jessica scrambled for the phone to call the police again, but the man disappeared as quickly as he had appeared. She heard a soft thud, as if he had jumped down from the balcony. The police arrived minutes later, but by the time they searched the area, the man was long gone. They did, however, find something unsettling. A ladder propped against the side of the building with muddy footprints leading away from it. Shaken, Jessica knew she couldn't stay another night in the apartment. She packed a few things and left the next day, unwilling to spend another moment in the place where she had once hoped for a fresh start. But as she left, she couldn't help but wonder, how long had the man been watching her, and was she truly safe? She never found out, but one thing was certain. Her New Year's resolution had turned into a terrifying encounter she would never forget. New Year's Eve is a time for celebration, but these stories show that sometimes the night can bring terror instead of joy. Thank you for watching the Eerie Hour. If you enjoyed these stories, please like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments which story haunted you the most. And remember, not every midnight visitor brings good fortune. Stay safe and have a happy new year.